I think there's a benefit to being someone who's a director and the visual effects artist. When I'm given a shot, I'm often asked to, like, fix it in some way. So when you're working on yourself, you could do a bunch of stuff to get it looking better, but you kind of choose not to because you treat it as an aesthetic. Technical nightmares become choices.
Felix Geen is not only a very good friend of mine, but also an incredibly talented VFX artist and director. When I first met him a couple years ago, I found out that he's behind one of my favorite music videos ever, Squid's Narrator. Felix's work on Narrator blew me away, and so did his approach to filmmaking.
There's so many conceptions around how visual effects should be done. I didn't have a formal training, I didn't go to university to study visual effects. I studied game design. So I always had a 3D perspective. You kind of just experiment and try stuff.
Drones went on to completely change Felix's vision.
When DJI released the Mavic drone, that just instantly opened up all these possibilities of what you can do with a flying camera that, has a stabilized gimbal attached to it.
He's become incredibly creative, marrying his VFX skills with flying drones. For his video for Building 650 by Squid, he collaborated with Daisuke Hasegawa, who managed directing the actors for the narrative part of the video.
My side of it was doing a bunch of rooftoping and not doing anything super illegal, but just getting myself onto rooftops so that I could actually film these drone shots and just having a lot of fun exploring this darker, seedier side of Tokyo that I hadn't really seen.
Felix sees the world around him differently, and I think that's part of why his work is so special.
If it's something that excites me, it's usually something that's kind of complicated. But I think in my own practice, I tend to sort of go down the path of technical approaches to things just because it's where I have a stronger voice. I feel safe in those places where I'm struggling with a technical problem. The limitations of things are always an inspiration, I think, to try and overcome them and work with them.
So, Felix, thanks so much for joining me here today. You know I'm a big fan of your work. We've spent some time talking about lots of projects together already. You know specifically that I'm a huge fan of a narrator, a video you did for Squid. That video is quite special to me. It's super immersive and quite unconventional. Is that video still special to you?
Yeah, it's really lovely that you like that video so much because it's honestly my favorite video I've ever made. It was probably one of the hardest videos I ever made, and it was also just one where I got to have so much fun and creativity with, and yeah, it really brought together so many of the things that I really find interesting and exciting about my practice. Which is drones I love. Obviously I use them all the time. Camera tracking, I'm really into this camera tracking stuff and 3D objects. It's also really about game world building, which is a lot to do with my own background, and it fills in a lot of stuff with just terrain and regolith and earth, which are all the kind of themes and topics that I like playing with. And yeah, and I mean the song just it's such a crazy build that it really has a fun kind of momentum to it as well. So it's a really fun track to get to work with. Yeah, so it still really plays a big part in my personal kind of repertoire of works I consider my favorite. Yeah.
That's really nice to hear. I think what is quite unconventional for me is also just the length of the video, right? It's I think it's roughly 9 minutes long. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you went into planning and conceptualizing, and just maybe talk a little bit about how your communication went with Squid, because that's quite a long chunk of material that needs to be generated for making a really enticing, interesting 9-minute video.
Sure. Yeah, I think whenever you're working with an artist, it's always there's always that initial kind of conversation about the way you see it going and sort of seeing if your ideas meet each other. And what was interesting about working with them is that because they're quite a big band of 5 members, they had quite a lot of ideas themselves about different things, but I think they probably realized quite early on in the process that their own maybe their own ambitions or ideas were not going to be super easy to mesh together in a specific way. And I mean, when the production company came to me, they sort of had a slight collection of videos that they sort of referenced as things they liked, and I looked through the references and I thought to myself wow, none of this is anything I want to create. And honestly, my idea was so very far away from anything that they were sort of referencing that I basically said to them, I don't know if it's really worth me even pitching on this, because what I'm going to suggest is going to be so kind of different. And they were like, no, please, tell us what you want to do. And so I put together this quite simple, maybe 3-page pitch, which was just essentially sort of like a bunch of kind of the tutorial videos I'd seen that I just liked the way that the tutorial aspect came across in the video. I liked the sort of like this placement of objects and how this kind of came in. And I just thought to myself, the only way I can fill this like nearly 9 minute long track is really if I just treat it as if it's a big kind of like tutorial or like workflow process video. Um, and that's the really the angle that I came at it from. I was imagining, I mean, whenever I work on a project, I tend to sort of build myself a framework of how I'm going to approach the project, and that becomes part of the project because the process is so fast with music videos that you're often you kind of have to in my opinion, you have to look at it as as one of the most key factors in the creation of the process is the like actual creation of the video. So like for me, it was about like, okay, I know I'm gonna try and keep it to as few shots as possible. So really just had like a few kind of these kind of big turns that I had in these big drone orbits that we had in the video, and I realized it wasn't really quite enough just in that in itself. Although I knew I was going to augment that a lot with 3D, I knew I would have to add some additional things. So I also really wanted to play this idea of the head cam being like a sort of the sort
Mhm.
of face cam motion capture face thing, which I thought was just a really funny look, the way that you get this sort of like up the nostril, like
Yeah,
kind of ugly look that
yeah,
it's so unflattering. And it played in a lot with the band not really wanting to be seen as like a kind of they didn't really want to be seen in a flattering light. So they also didn't really want to be in the video that much, I feel like.
yeah,
So they weren't like keen on looking really cool or anything. So that was really it helped a lot. We also talked about quite a lot about Benedict Cumberbatch in
yeah.
and playing Smog,
I
which was
was
a big
about to say
reference.
this is literally,
Yeah,
yeah, that's literally the
which was a
thing.
big reference, I think, for us, and just this sort of this funny, weird kind of like morph suit that he's in when he's playing Smog. So that was a big sort of that was like a funny section that almost didn't make it in some ways because I actually when I got
Right.
to editing the whole piece, I didn't really know if I wanted to include that material of the face cam stuff, but in the end, it just made sense because we got to a point where it was just the video was starting to drag and the 3D stuff was not really holding so much. So yeah, we ended up bringing that in at the last minute kind of thing to like to just have hype up that final finale with the video. There was also the stuff with the destruction of the heads, which was an idea I had early on. It was actually a reference to the I think I remember watching a breakdown video that the company who did the Game of Thrones title sequence. It was some kind of like it was all these like different the heads of the different houses of the series sort of like crumbling and crashing. I just loved how that felt just so epic. Like it's quite a simple effect in the sense that you're just doing a simulation of one 3D object breaking. But I just
Yeah.
really wanted to get that detail and kind of like it's like a nice kind of procedural approach to like something that builds tension and or actually releases tension, or like releases this sort of like screaming because like the banshee sort of scream that Martha Skye Murphy gives just creates this sort of like shattering of loads of things. So that was actually fun because I got my friend Pascal to work on that piece, and it was a combination of scans done by my friend Josh, and Pascal took those. I mean, I processed the scans, and Pascal took them into Houdini, and he just built like a setup. So he really just had to do one setup, and then he could just sim all the different destructions quite quickly.
So it was mainly a team of three on this one?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, so I guess, yeah, it was basically me, sort of handling the filming, the drone aspect, and the production and the directing, and then I did the editing. It's basically all the sort of like 3D stuff in the shots, and then the actual scanning of the objects, like get capturing them and being on set with me and assisting was my friend Josh, who's also a director in his own right and a DOP and just a very skilled artist himself. And we work always. Basically every project I've done, most of them has always either been with Josh or working as his assistant on his projects. So, we worked quite close together for a long time. And then, yeah, Pascal, who I also work closely a lot of the time with more in a sort of post-production scenario, because he does a lot of 3D and simulation-based stuff in Houdini. So, um, yeah, he just kind of came on and just churned through that over in a couple of days, really just like sorted that out for me, which was really great. He offered that help early on in the project and just, as he does, just gets it done, which is really great. Yeah.
Amazing. I mean, you're already touching on a lot of subjects that are like quite common for music video, right? It's like it's indirectly mentioning budgetary restraints and keeping a close network of friends around you who you can
Mm,
trust and who you can share your vision with. But
mm,
I think, yeah, one of the reasons why I also find Naruto quite unconventional is because when you see the first couple of seconds, I instantly thought of a big studio, a big setup, just to be able to, yeah, nicely key everything out, key the band out, and place them into these different environments. And
mm,
I, yeah, I remember I was quite shocked, like positively shocked, obviously, that you managed to pull this off in sunlight outside
mm,
with, obviously, as the day goes on, the sunlight moves, the shadow
mm,
position moves, which is quite tricky, I
mm.
assume, for any kind of post production. Um, so yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about how you came to commit to the idea of filming this on this tartan sports track.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that yeah, I think that's actually possibly one of the most interesting parts of the whole process of the video in that sense is that like there's so many conceptions around how visual effects should be done. And I think it's like very like as I got into visual effects, the way I kind of approached visual effects from my background was very, very kind of I didn't have a formal training, you know, I didn't go to university to study visual effects. I studied game design. So I always had a 3D perspective on things, like a three-dimensional kind of like I always was playing with this with these ideas in my work. But when I finally sort of worked out what visual effects was in an industry kind of sense, I was kind of I don't know, like, it was a very strange process of learning, so for me, like, I would just try things out and see if they worked, like, a lot of the time when I was getting into working in the industry, I was just, you know there weren't many tutorials, there wasn't many visual effects tutorials out there, there was, like, the Andrew Kramer Video Copilot tutorials, which were really useful, but, like, not many kind of creative visual effects tutorials, so you kinda just experiment and try stuff, and at some point along the way, when the drone when DJI released the Mavic drone, me and Josh were so excited about this, we just, instantly got one together, we bought it we went halves on one basically, and that just like instantly opened up all these possibilities of what you can do with something with a flying camera that has a stabilized gimbal attached to it. And one of the things that just kind of clicked in my head at one point was that I was out walking around and I saw a tennis court and I thought, wow, like this is like an enormous green screen basically. But like, how would you film on it because it's not in the right place? It's not a cove. It's not a wall. You have to be standing on it for it to make sense. And I was just thinking, well, if you get the camera up above the horizon line then it is a green screen and essentially like you could do anything. You could set a movie on Mars or you could like, you could film a low budget green screen film here with and then I was like, yeah, actually the lighting is even really useful because often on set you're trying to emulate sunlight. You're trying to bring in huge bulbs, to get you like this light that looks like sun, but it's never right because sunlight is completely parallel. It doesn't have it doesn't have all the aspects that a bulb that's close to you has. So a lot of the time you're sort of
Uh-huh.
faking these things just to try and get things to look more realistic. So it's kind of funny to sort of like take all of those problems out of the equation and just solve them with like a one shot drone. It's just like, all you need is like a tennis court and a drone and you've got yourself a green screen and a really expensive light setup, which is just, obviously we were kind of I say we were lucky on the day with the fact that we didn't get any rain basically, but like if it had been a cloudy day, I was hoping it was going to be a cloudy day because honestly the shadows the directional shadows that we got, the sun came out and I was like, well, we're gonna shoot this either way, and it was kind of a nightmare because I obviously went in and matched all the shadows so that they look correct. I matched the 3D shadows to the real world shadows so that they all look the right direction, and I think that actually does help bed it together. But in reality, I kind of hoped everything would be a bit more flat because I was thinking I kind of wanted this sort of flat lighting where everything looked a bit more 3D and kind of CGI in a sense, like I wanted it to look quite fake, but this actually worked out really well and it bedded together the comp. So actually as someone who claims to be like a compositor, I actually kind of just um, didn't really do much compositing at all here. It's just like all I did was key the shot and color correct it a little bit, and then just like drop it into the 3D scene as a kind of texture projection, and then
Gotcha.
it does what it does, and you can see there's problems everywhere, but luckily no one really notices.
It's always the thing, right? I think it's a great example for this compromise between what would be ideal for this kind of shoot, and then obviously praying to the filmmaking gods that you get the right weather, and then obviously you don't get the right weather because, as you said, a giant softbox, aka typical UK gray clouds, would have been ideal for you to
Yeah.
have all these possibilities in post production. But at the end of the day, going with what you need to, you have no influence on the weather. And then actually this harsh sunlight look also adds something to it because of precisely the reasons you talked about. You
Mm,
don't really see that often in other videos, right?
mm,
Because other artists might try to avoid these harsh moving shadows if it's for a video that is so heavily reliant on post production.
mm.
Um, and I think you already
Yeah.
also touching on a funny point is like you spend so much time, right, obsessing about these decisions, thinking that it will fall apart within the first 10 viewers, dismantling and dissecting your work. And the truth for so many things is like people don't even notice, people don't
Yeah.
care, which is quite
Yeah.
frustrating, but also a very freeing thing in the end, I guess.
Yeah, being in control of your being like I think there's a benefit to being someone who's a director and the visual effects artist because you don't like and also someone who doesn't really have is not super precious. Like I have a very DIY approach on my work, my aesthetic is like it's a lot about because in my day-to-day work when I'm given a shot by a producer or I'm often asked to like fix it in some way or treat it in a certain way. So you kind of learn a repertoire of ways to get around problems and to make things look right. So when you're working on yourself with yourself, you basically that you could make it, you could fix these things, you could do a bunch of stuff to get it looking better, but you kind of choose not to because you know that's going to save you a lot of time, and you sort of treat it as an aesthetic, and you start to sort of have these aesthetic approaches to a lot of things that would be otherwise technical nightmares become kind of choices. And I think that's what's really fun about music videos as well, is that they're a medium that doesn't require you to really like answer to any higher client-based entity. Or I mean, maybe the label might cause some problems or the band might have some things they want to see, but most of the time it's just a creative expression and it's fun. So yeah, it was really lucky on this job that everyone was just very happy from day one about everything that was happening on screen.
Yeah, I mean, that video is a couple years old now, but you've rejoined forces with Squid, I think this year or at the end of last year, 2024,
Yeah, that's right.
for the video for Building 650.
Hmm.
I would love to hear because I find it really interesting when a band, especially over the course of many years, doesn't exclusively work with a set of creatives, but comes back to them every now and then. I would
Hmm.
assume for a specific aesthetic, because obviously
Hmm.
also Building 650 involves quite an interesting take on using a drone, and this time marrying it with Super 8 millimeter. So yeah, I would love to hear how you also in relationship to Squid and the band members, and you said right, like 5 people, 5 opinions, and the label,
Hmm.
how you took your experiences from narrator into this video, which is quite a long time in between these two videos, right?
Sure. Yeah, it was kind of a surprise actually to get that email. The kind of request, the budget was a lot smaller for starters. There was like, yeah, substantial. It was like a third, and it was definitely a shorter timeline as well. It felt like it was quite tight. So a lot of it was kind of like trying to find a new language that was similar to is in a similar vein, but also carried across these new concepts that they'd brought into their new album. And this piece was really based on this book, this Murakami book, which is called In the Miso Soup. It's a story about a murderer in Tokyo. So it's very set in Tokyo. And I'd actually been to Tokyo the previous year for the first time and I had an amazing time there. And I really wanted to go back, and I was sort of waiting to find a way to go back. And I'd met this guy out there last time I was there, a guy who had written to me on Instagram, and this Daisuke, his name was Daisuke, and he just wanted to talk about the Squid video, actually, quite similar to how we just talked about it. He
Mhm.
wanted to talk about the
Funny.
original. He
Yeah.
was like, "Yeah, I love this video." Like, he just wanted to, meet, and we met in the park and we chatted about it. And I was saying to him, if there's ever another opportunity to work on a video like that, or for Squid even, I'll definitely hit you up. Yeah, so it was funny. Like a year goes by, and then Squid write to me, and they have this video that's based on this book set in Japan, and I was thinking, wow, this could be perfect. Like I could actually go back to Japan. I could meet with Daisuke. We could like actually collaborate on this video. And yeah, the only real thing that was in the way was just like how little money there was and how actually little time there was, and also
Yeah.
how I was feeling at the time, quite burned out, honestly. Like
Mhm.
quite, I was kind of it's coming to the end of the year.
Mhm.
I was feeling quite tired, and I was thinking, God, like I could actually just do with a break. But So I put together a pitch that was quite simple. It kind of stripped back a lot of ideas that I'd had. It was, and the core for me, the thing that I really wanted to get across was actually just, again, drones, like again, like drone in the city. And my idea was to sort of use this new technology, which is called Gaussian splatting. It's a kind of like neural radiance field capture technology, which is for essentially making a kind of 3D object, but it looks way more realistic than a traditional photo scan does. So I wanted to kind of build these large scale scans of Tokyo, and just, I didn't really know, like use them in some way to get across this feeling of a predator that's like descending on this sort of like I guess like a kind of a ghostly apparition, a sort of this creature
Mm.
that's like just feeding off um the energy of the city. And like I kind of wanted to abstract the story of this character Frank in the book to try and make him into more of like an abstract character. I didn't really want to have like an actual uh actor playing this guy. But it was really interesting working with Daisuke because he was going down this approach of, we kind of went two different separate ways. He went and sort of directed his own shoot, which was amazing actually to be a part of, because it was just working with a bunch of amazing people from film background, like who actually really have those skills. We had everyone on that shoot, and it lasted like 24 hours. It was like an insanely powerful shoot that we got everything we wanted, and we shot it all on Super 8, and we did like
Mhm.
3 locations. And then my side of it was like doing a bunch of rooftopping and like illegal kind of, not doing anything super illegal, but just like getting myself onto rooftops so that I could actually film these drone shots, because the signal to the drone requires line of sight. So I had to be up high to get the line of sight to the drone, so I could do these big turns and capturing huge areas. And so I was having a lot of fun just like going out at night and filming all these little vignettes and kind of doing a bunch of scans of smaller stuff in the back alleys and things, and just having a lot of fun exploring this darker, seedier side of Tokyo that I hadn't really seen. Yeah, and I really I went a bit mad actually. But it was definitely in a good way. So yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, but I imagine also being quite challenging on this one because, right, you shot this in Tokyo with another team of directors, and there's quite a lot of footage to go through. There's again quite a lot of work to do in the edit, marrying these two quite different aesthetics, right? You spoke about it yourself.
Mhm.
You have the Super 8, which is more like traditional narrative storytelling in this linear fashion, married with, you describe it yourself as this like, yeah, like a non-entity, ghostly
Mhm.
murderer which moves around the city.
Mhm.
And then I assume you're back in Berlin, right? When you're actually getting into the edit, and then you have to do everything in post
Yeah,
remotely.
it was a very short shoot. I think I spent maybe 5 days in Tokyo in total, and it felt way quicker. I mean, yeah, we really crammed it in. And yeah, then I came back to Berlin, and I was actually, to be honest, it was such a short turnaround that I was spending my days of daylight sitting in my hotel room with my computer like up against the hotel like tiny little mirror desk with a little keyboard, like offloading footage I'd shot,
Mhm.
processing it all, running it through my laptop, which is a decent laptop, but it was like, quite loud. I couldn't leave the hotel room because if I closed the door, the power goes off in the hotel room and my battery would die. So I had to stay there rendering
Oh
things like,
God.
because I wanted to get all this material
Yeah.
processing so I could actually edit it. So yeah, it was a lot of processing and editing, and then at night I would go out and shoot, and then I just do that on repeat. So I was really, really burning the candle on both ends, and then doing this epic 24-hour shoot as well. And then once all that was done, we came back to Berlin, had a couple of days of rest, and then the edit was actually quite fast because honestly, I'm very, very brutal with these things. Like I just make something, and that's kind of it. Like unless there's some massive problem with the
Mhm.
render that I've done,
Mhm.
I'm kind of just like, "That's fine." Like, I don't really have this, like, go back and forth thing when it comes to my own work. I'm so concerned about delivery that I'm not really thinking so much about, like, perfectionism at that point. Maybe that's to my own fault sometimes because a lot of my work does look quite janky. But, the Japanese contingent were a bit like, "Hmm, we don't know if this is, like, really good enough." And I was like, well, I don't know, like, you wanna redo it? So, I don't know, like, it was quite funny working with them because they were quite honest, quite
Mhm.
brutally honest with a lot of the stuff I was making, which was kind of cool actually to, like, have this, like, critical eye on
Yeah.
your work. And, Yeah, at the end, we actually spent a real long time doing a bunch of different little re-edits and kind of like changing the pacing of the film. And then in the end, we also spent quite a long time color grading and trying to bring it all together so it felt quite cohesive. And that was like, yeah, massive props to the team over there. Like, really, really just such diligent work, like such hard work, and all no, and all just for the passion, really, because there was really no money to pay anyone properly. So really amazing work ethic from everybody involved. It was incredible.
Yeah, really nice to hear.
Yeah.
I wanna dig in a little bit in like finding out where your obsession with drones is coming from. Already said you studied game design, so that really clicks for me that because lots of your work has a really gamified aesthetic, so I can see where that how that is inspired by like a plethora of gaming worlds.
Yeah, I guess it's always been a fascination of mine since I was very young. So I grew up in kind of a middle of nowhere land in Scotland, and I had a very reclusive upbringing. And I think I found myself kind of obsessing over technology from a young age. I should say also, my dad is like an electronics engineer, so I guess I always had this kind of technological side going on in my upbringing, my childhood, and I also was living in a very remote, forested area. And for some reason, the idea of like a little flying thing, just I'm sure a lot of kids have that, but this idea of like I love remote control cars. I loved like anything that was just like, some kind of remote control thing. And I think the idea that I could have a little flying remote control thing was just the coolest idea. And when I was, I don't know, I think I was like 15 or something, and my parents got me this like little helicopter thing that was just very, very, very very perceptible to crashing. I think I probably flew it like I flew it a couple of times and then crashed it every single time, and then by the fifth time it was broken forever. So yeah, when the DJI Mavic came out, I think it was just like the opportunity to fly something that was so well honed and, just engineered to a point that it just didn't crash was the most powerful kind of crazy thing about it. And yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint the moment in which I decided that that's what I was gonna be obsessed with, but I feel like it was kind of a bit of a combination of a lot of different things, in the area of where I was at that point in time just happened to be the moment when DJI released that specific drone, the Mavic, which sort of enabled the easy capture, the easy kind of, because there was obviously the Phantom before that, and
Right.
there were loads of camera drones before that
Yeah.
that solved those problems, but none of them really did it in the way that the Mavic kind of did.
Yeah, because I mean, I remember when you showed me a rough edit that you've done for Ship Sket and Seychelles video for Rain, and I was
Mm,
absolutely blown away. I mean that's an aesthetic that I haven't seen used like that in I don't think in any other music video. Like I mean, thermal camera imaging
mm,
is obviously quite popular in music videos. It's often combined
mm,
with dance performances or
mhm,
um, yeah, just like where like body temperature obviously plays a huge part, right? And then there's lots of versions where there's also a colorization process of the black and
mm,
white gradients to have this effect of actual seeing the different temperatures and color values. But that in combination with drone footage, you only see it in this heavily militarized
mm,
context, right? Where it's like it's in conflict zones, it's in zones of war. Um, with heavy trauma and horrible, horrible things happening. So I love when these technologies that obviously come from a military industrial complex history are kind of taken out of that context and being turned into something beautiful again, right? Like you feature this breakdancer over various spots in Berlin.
so I think you really hit an interesting point there, and that's kind of like a lot of my work kind of like I've always been interested in ways in which thermal cameras used in music videos as well, and it's become more prevalent recently as well. I feel like they get cheaper all the time. The
Mhm.
FLIR cameras become the sensors and they become cheaper and cheaper. But I think they've always been reserved for these kind of high budget shoots, and I spent years and years looking into ways of getting like a high resolution thermal image. Um, and a lot of the time you're looking at things like rifle scopes, as you said, like it's always to do with military. It's always kind of war focused kind of, the only other options are like, in the sort of industry where they, use them for like surveying or just checking that things are not overheating, like power line observations and stuff. But yeah, it's usually to do with military stuff. And this this once again just comes down to DJI's innovation. They just released this drone that was called the DJI Mavic Enterprise, which was designed for search and rescue missions and
Mhm.
also, checking power lines, and has also been used heavily in the Ukraine war and a lot of other, obviously also in Israel-Palestine's conflict as well. And I think that aesthetic, it just becomes more prevalent in the public eye as well when you realize how those things become, more used and more readily available. And I'd always just thought, like, it would be so interesting to be able to have that perspective and to sort of, play with that perspective in a way that does raise some questions about what's really being said or what's really being shown here. Because so yeah, I guess the drone itself was like, it's a quite an expensive drone. It's still not cheap, but it's still very cheap considering what it is. I think it costs around I think I paid around 7,000 to buy it, from Amazon. And then I basically just kept it for 30 days, filmed a video, and then returned it to Amazon because I didn't want the drone. I wasn't going to use it again for anything else. And I know, like, it's obviously a little bit cheeky, but in the end, it kind of worked out fine in that way. Um, but yeah, so the whole idea was sort of trying to play on this idea of, yes, like, what does it mean when you have this top-down perspective
Mhm.
on people, when you observe people from above, and when you observe them with this thermal camera, you have all this insight into, like, the movements and behaviors of people that you would not be able to see at night, especially. And it just creates this instant feeling of suspicion. You just feel like whatever these
Mhm.
people are doing, it's very suspicious.
Mhm.
But really, like, they're just getting on a bus, or they're just like,
Yeah.
just taking their child
Yeah.
home from nursery, or they're whatever, they're just doing the day-to-day life. They're just having a cigarette together on the street, or maybe they're just getting out of their car.
Mhm.
Um, and all these things just look very suspicious. We're just immediately impressioned. We have this impression that it's something dodgy is going on, which is, I just wanted to play with that idea of questioning, but also I kind of really wanted to get across this idea of this. It's something that didn't really come across so well in the video, but I really wanted to have more dancers. I wanted to have more
Mhm.
of these kind of like TikTok dancers who are just like dancing spontaneously
Mhm.
and kind of like aggressively in this way that's very like performative. Not only because the track kind of needed that energy, but
Mhm.
also just because there's something interesting about this uh, surveillance of how we all record ourselves constantly, and we're sort of performing now more in this way that's like, we upload these videos to the internet of, the younger generation does it a lot anyway, the sort of generation of TikTokers, how they sort of feel the need to perform these actions and then
Mhm.
make themselves available online. I just wanted to kind of like question that as well as a sort of interesting phenomenon. And yeah, it kind of came together quite nicely in the video. I think like the edit process was quite fun, just to sort of cut it up really, really roughly to the track and have it quite raw. Like, I kept everything very raw. And I honestly feel like, to be honest, I wish I'd spent more time on it and more
Mhm.
energy in bringing all these different ideas together in a cleaner way, because it's there was so much more I could have explored there,
Yeah.
which is the frustration I have on almost all of my videos personally. I always feel like I don't quite go far enough with
Yeah.
the idea, with the execution, but there's always room within each of these ideas to explore again. So I feel like, could go back again and look at it one day.
Yeah, with a little Amazon sponsoring of 30
Yeah,
days.
Amazon's, please sponsor me.
Yeah. That's hilarious. I really wanted to ask you where you draw your inspiration from these days in your day to day, because obviously you do a mix of, like, for the Germans have a beautiful word for the money you need to make a living, which is Lohnarbeit, which is commercial projects, and then the projects you do on your own, which are very, very like tech and graphics and
Hmm.
visually driven, but also inspired, like in the Squid video, right, from this Japanese book.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, in this industry where there's also so much output and you have to spend so much time fixing problems that arise on the actual days of shooting, um, I really wonder, yeah, where do you
Hmm.
get your inspiration from?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very interesting question. And it's actually, I mean, I think throughout my career, I've kind of like found different things that have inspired me.
Uh-huh.
But I think when it comes to my own personal kind of growth and development, a lot of what I kind of, a lot of what I fall back on for my own visual language and also for my own interest is just the kind of like, it often comes from a place of wondering, like, what will this new technology or this new possibility bring? I think in the
Uh-huh.
back of my head, whenever I'm dealing with something like, I don't know if it's like like for example, this 360 camera.
Uh-huh.
Um, like I did a tutorial about a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, where I talked about this Insta360 camera,
Uh-huh.
which is great for doing on-set visual effects capture stuff. And then there's just a couple of problems that came up, and I've sort of realized over the years, or even straight away after working with it, that there's just quite a few like limitations with this, and that kind of like drove me to sort of like always try and find a solution for that problem. And in the end, I sort of discovered that you could get these like ND filters um for this other Insta360 camera, which enables you to sort of overcome this problem
Uh,
of like not being able to capture enough highlight detail in your 360s. And I suppose that that kind of like is kind of an example in the sense that just a lot of what kind of drives my inspiration for work is just like something new coming along, like with the thermal camera that on the
mhm,
Mavic. It's sort of like, you know, this new thing opens up, this new possibility, and people start playing with the technology, and then the question is like, how do you apply it to your own ideas or your
mhm,
own kind of like inspirations? And yeah, that's kind of like a personal thing, I suppose. I mean, a lot of the time you see people using the technology in the way that it's intended to be used, and it's often like sometimes that can be really interesting as well.
mhm,
Just they take it to a really amazing place and they use it in a way that's like, you know, um, the way it's sort of meant to be used. But I think a lot of the time I'm always trying to think of ways in which you shouldn't use
uh-huh,
something, or like,
uh-huh,
or often it's like breaking some rule or law in the way that I want to use it, and then I just do it anyway because I think it's more important to experiment. And I think that's kind of what I find most interesting about art. A lot of the time when I'm looking at
uh-huh,
art, I'm like thinking about how has this piece been made, and then you start asking why it was made, and more than, you know, if it's something that excites me, it's usually something that's kind of complicated in a way that in the way
right,
that it's being created. And I obviously I love things that are just purely aesthetic, and I love things that are just really really well informed and theoretical as well. But I think
yeah,
in my own practice, I tend to sort of go down the path of like technical approaches to things, just because it's where I feel most comfortable. It's where I have like a stronger voice,
yeah.
and I feel like just very like um, I feel safe in those places where I'm struggling with a technical problem. So often it's that like this sort of inspires me. The limitations of things are always like an inspiration, I think, to try and overcome them and work with them.
I mean, that like daisy chains quite nicely onto it. I think I recently made a little video about where I talk about the implications of thoughtlessly implementing AI technologies in music video industries and how directly that can threaten the livelihoods of so many people, right?
Hmm.
Versus it obviously being an incredibly useful tool in filmmakers' toolboxes to translate certain ideas and concepts and all that kind of stuff. And obviously
Hmm.
within the VFX and CGI world, AI technologies have been always, yeah, like fundamentally tied to your work.
Sure. I think that's a really interesting point. And I watched that video that you made about that topic as well, and I thought that was a really nice approach that you came at that subject. And yeah, like so I've used AI in my work from the very beginning. Like for example, this music video here for Magdalena Bay, I think
Mhm.
this is possibly one of the first ever music videos to have AI in it. Maybe not the first music video ever to use AI, but the first one to sort of I don't know, I haven't seen any other music video that's tried to approach, AI in this way of
Yeah.
storytelling. And I think I did that because I wanted a tool that could, I mean, the band asked me, what would you do if you could do anything in this for this
Mhm.
video? And I was like, well, I would take you guys to like, I would take you to a load of different locations because the
Mhm.
song's all about travel. It's all about journey. It's all about a
Mhm.
trip, basically, like trip
Mhm.
in a lot of different senses. So I was sort of thinking, oh, you know, where could we go? And I didn't want to do a green screen video in the typical sense because I
Mhm.
think that's something they've done quite a lot in their work, and I wanted to try something new. So for
Right.
me, the AI was just a way of us exploring a visual language and exploring a journey in a way that like I had never seen before,
Mm.
and I wanted to just try that out really. But then I think from a professional perspective and more recently, as AI becomes, obviously this video is quite janky in a lot of ways. It
Mhm.
comes across as quite like lo-fi,
Mhm.
which works okay, but it definitely looks quite dated already in the
Mhm.
sense that AI's, you know, image generation and video generation has come a long way. And in the recent years, I've been using it still in my production work. And actually, I used it recently for a company for a video project where I was asked to make a flower blooming effect. And basically, I was given this flower which is shot on 16 millimeter, I think, and it was kind of like grainy and shaky shot that I was provided. And their request was, can you make this flower open and blossom and bloom? And I was thinking, God, like from a perspective from a traditional VFX perspective, that's actually a very hard ask
Mm-hmm.
because you would have to recreate the entire flower in 3D, and you would have
Mm-hmm.
to, rebuild all the petals, and you'd have to, or
Mm-hmm.
you'd have to do a very complicated 2D effect that would probably not look very good. And what I actually tried, which was an experiment more than anything, was
Mm-hmm.
just running this through um, many different AI tools with many different approaches. One of my ideas was to create the bud initially in Photoshop as an opening,
Mm-hmm.
as a first frame, and
Mm-hmm.
then try and blend it into a second frame using this A/B frame thing that AI can
Right.
do.
Mm-hmm.
So I did hundreds of different attempts at this
Mm-hmm.
before landing on one that actually looked half decent.
Mm-hmm.
Which was quite funny, the process of just like clicking a button and clicking a button and clicking a button until you finally something spits out that's correct. But
Yeah.
and I think what works so well for this is that the training set, the data set that there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of these AIs is built on is this kind of cheesy time lapse of flowers opening, which is kind of like a typical
Funny.
thing you see.
Yeah.
So luckily that was like it existed in the data sets probably already. So it was just a case of waiting till
Yeah.
the AI just found that seed and just used
Right.
that as
Yeah.
its inspiration for its generation. And the end result looked quite kind of I at the end I sort of reapplied all the grain and gate wobble and
Nice.
effects back on, so it ended up looking quite high quality and quite good
Amazing.
at the end. So that was a really good that's a success story in terms of AI. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the
Yeah.
time it's not like that, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the time it is just a case of you're dealing with something that's very low quality, very
Mm-hmm.
low detail, low bit rate, low bit depth,
Mm-hmm.
low fidelity in every sense of the
Mm-hmm.
word, and also kind of looks a bit weird and kind of blobby and bad. I mean, that's changing all the time, but there isn't really a tool at this point that can really solve a lot of the
Yeah.
harder visual effects problems that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. So it's quite insulting when you see some people writing in the comment section of videos that you spent weeks on, "Oh, this was just done with AI." Because you're like, "No, no, like that took like ages
Believe
and ages
me.
to get that to look right." Yeah. But yeah, it's definitely changing all the time, and I think I personally can still tell when something's made with AI, but
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll get to a point at some stage where even someone who's, as media literate or
Mm-hmm.
savvy with this kind of thing will also be like, "What the hell? Is this
Yeah.
AI? I don't know."
Yeah.
So yeah, we're approaching that point, I suppose. But does that answer your question?
I think it exemplifies quite nicely, kind of like the duality that I was talking about as well in my video, right? It's about AI becoming or being a tool to solve certain problems. So like in your
Yeah.
work, you're presented with a flower that is already opened, shot on film, lots of grain, there's gate weave, there's all these light flickers things going on as well. And you are asked on a tight deadline with limited budget to create this flower from opening, right? And then
Yeah.
there's no one fit all solution that would look like satisfactory in the end. So you spend a lot of time and resources in finding out the right technology to tackle this problem, which you would do in After Effects or DaVinci in the same way with other problems, right? Like it would be the same thing. Like you might need to rotoscope something,
Yeah.
you might need to animate something that wasn't animated before, and obviously it's using the best tool available
Hmm.
to achieve a solution to that problem versus this kind of ideology of one fits all. We're going to save a lot of money. We're going to streamline everything. Um, we're gonna we're not
Yeah.
going to employ the same amount of freelancers that are traditionally employed to get this job done
Yeah.
by jamming it all in and not really caring about the final product, right? Like you obviously
Yeah.
have a strong feeling about authenticity and how
Hmm.
things should look, right? And so I think do most audiences, but I see more and more examples now, and my example was Wu-Tang Clan's video for
Yes.
Mandingo,
Yes.
where people don't seem to care at all. I mean, there was a huge backlash on Reddit, which I found really interesting, but in the YouTube comments, it was really just people saying, I love Wu-Tang Clan, this is
Hmm.
amazing.
Yeah.
I love hip hop. Like it's, I mean, who knows if these comments are even real, but it was really just an unfiltered celebration
Yeah.
of slop. Like it was
I
nothing
think
else but
yeah.
slop, right? Yeah.
I think for that video, I can't help but feel like, I mean, I've worked with so many different
Mhm.
labels and artists and from various budgets and backgrounds and locations. I feel like sometimes you just get a perfect storm of someone who doesn't really have someone who doesn't really have their finger on the pulse of
Mhm.
what's good or what's interesting right now, interacting with someone who's very taste doesn't really have much of a taste either or understanding about a sensitivity around a certain topic. And they just kind of come together in this perfect storm of just completely not caring or listening to what's necessary and just thinking about probably about budget, really, as you said. Like, we don't have much money. Can you do this for a couple of thousand or less dollars or whatever? And then they go, yeah, we can do that. And they just run it through this AI tool. And what comes out the other end is slop and gross, but they don't really care because it's novel and new. And I have to
Mhm.
say I have I have dabbled in that myself personally with some projects that I don't particularly want to talk about or show. But then yeah, I think it is all just about having a relationship with your own work and your own aesthetic. I
Yeah.
think also clients also have that too. Like people who care about visuals have that, and
Mhm.
people who care about the way things look and the way they feel, and that they still exist. Those people aren't going to go away, and most of us who have a conscience do care about those things. So I
Yeah.
honestly come back to this kind of positive outlook that although a lot of these things are going to be replaced, a lot of these menial tasks will be replaced. A lot of the kind of
Mhm.
processes that we know now will probably disappear. We'll still have a need for real artistry and real taste and real, eyes, human eyes to be observing and checking the things that are being created for whether or not they're actually interesting and whether or not they're actually worth showing off in the world. Because so much of what gets made is just complete slop and rightfully goes away quite quickly. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
No, I 100% agree. So maybe as a final question to put a nice positive spin to it as well, and to understand what human projects you are into for
Mm,
2025, and where you also maybe would like to see your work developing in the future, which I think is always a really interesting question, right? Because
mm,
we always find ourselves doing, like, being in these loops of, like trying to make a living and then still exploring uh, different things that we find interesting in our free time, or trying to combine it a little bit with Lohnarbeit, the
mhm.
lovely German word.
Well, I think yeah, the question or the point about doing more stuff for community and with people is really what's important to me. I mean, all my favorite projects that I've ever done have always been with other people, and it's just yeah, it's so important, especially as a freelancer who spends all their time behind the desk, to really find ways of getting yourself out and getting yourself, collaborating and exploring your own inspirations outside of just the computer screen. And so personally, I mean, I have my Lohnarbeit work that I'm
Mhm.
focusing on too, and I'm not shying away from those projects, and I'm taking them on, but just to a lesser degree. And I'm going to be spending more of my time. Actually, I'm going to be participating in a workshop in the Polish desert, which is run by some friends of mine who are a big community of artists and creatives. And we're going to be spending almost 3 weeks just setting up a camp in this big man-made Polish desert called Bledo Desert. Um, and yeah,
Amazing.
it's basically a residency that I'm gonna do there, and I'm gonna film the whole thing. I'm gonna use drones. I'm gonna use my cameras, and I want to try and capture this festival or this sort of this
Mhm.
big workshop as a kind of performance piece, but also to explore some ideas I've had about transience of human kind of settlements and also explorations of different timelines, and trying to get across some science fiction ideas in there as well, because I find this place a very inspirational science fiction kind of area. So there's a bunch of creative ideas I have to do with that space that I'm looking forward to having that residency time,
Mhm.
where I'm really completely away from the computer, which is going to be really
Yeah.
fun. And I also have an intention to return to my YouTube projects, because I have a YouTube channel which has a few tutorials on it that I really
Mhm.
want to try and explore more on and update them. One of them is actually to do with this 360 camera that I talked about already.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm going to be exploring some other other kind of techniques to help visual effects artists in their own practices when they're on set. So yeah, a lot of stuff to do with like connecting to a wider audience and having more of a communication that isn't just me reading the YouTube comment section of my latest music video and holding my head in despair or whatever. But yeah, it's a really nice question, and yeah, it's something I'm looking forward to this summer and this year. I would like to ask you as well, the same question. What kind of
Mhm.
projects have you got coming up this year, and how do you plan on integrating your own ideas of community into your work and sustaining your excitement for your work in the current landscape of AI degradation?
That's hilarious. Um, no, thank you for bouncing that question back. I think, yeah, it's probably what I think about most of my days now, if I'm not crumbling over the horrors that are going on in the world. It's like how I change my own practice to accommodate a bit more the feelings of the needs for solidarity and empathy and community building, because I think at the end of the day, that's kind of the only mechanisms and methods that will work against feelings of frustration.
Hmm.
I do, as you know, like I do a mixture of work as a first AC, as a cameraman, um, for commercial projects and music videos and all that kind of stuff. So I will probably always have, just like you, one part of me financially being
Hmm.
entrenched in that kind of work, but then it's really about how to organize everything around. Last year, I've started with a couple of colleagues of mine here in Berlin. We started this little film network to basically offer our professional skills in various departments, from post-production to sound to filmmaking, etc., to NGOs or other like activism groups, or charity projects here in Berlin, to basically support them in their need for content creation, for might it be social media, or I don't know, like archiving a talk they're giving, or like accompanying a demonstration, because
Hmm.
I think that really ties me together, and other people have the same need, right? So um, ties us together professionally with our skills, with people whose projects actually matter, whose
Hmm.
projects actually make a difference, and really often on a really small scale, right? It might just be a
Hmm.
neighborhood project that is connecting a couple of people together, and then with your help in media production, they can better apply for funding. They can properly archive their process and then see where they might need some more help. So I think this is a really easy way for me to get involved again, because I think lots of the frustration comes from not really knowing how to um, partake in a charity again, because maybe your last 10 years have been so different and not really coined and framed by activism or something similar.
Hmm.
So taking a part of what you know quite well through work, I think, is a really good approach. And I do definitely want to professionalize that more with my colleagues, which is actually also a lot of fun.
Hmm.
Um, Also to come up with your own projects and maybe your own little documentary projects to frame um, up. So yeah, that's definitely, I think, on my list for this year, to commit a little bit more time and energy even. Although I'm quite maxed out already, but still, I think there's always a little bit more you can push, especially if it's projects that really mean a lot to you and are not of commercial nature. Yeah.
Well, you're really someone who I see as doing so many different things, so many interesting projects, and you really follow through with all of them. And it's very exciting to see. Also, just with this YouTube channel you're creating as well, I'm really like I'm honored to be interviewed and be a part of it. And I love what you're doing when you're building it. And I'm very inspired by everything that you're creating. So thank you for including me in this.
Thanks, man. You're the first one, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this together. It's lots of fun.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can only say it again. It's been lots of fun talking to you today, Felix, and going through your
Hmm.
projects in a little bit more detail. I think it's super interesting to seeing how you work, and obviously all the best for your projects this year. They sound really interesting. Yeah, talk to you soon.
Cool. Speak to you later. Bye bye.